She was chopping vegetables for tomorrow's breakfast when the first explosion shattered the kitchen windows. Glass scattered across the prep tables while the emergency sirens began their haunting wail across Forward Operating Base Sandstone. Elena Rodriguez wiped her hands on her apron and reached for the radio, but static filled the airwaves where coordination should have been. Then a voice crackled through the interference, desperate and strained. Base security requesting immediate tactical support from Cookie 6. That's when everyone in the command bunker stopped talking, because the panicked voice on the radio wasn't asking for the Special Forces team, wasn't calling for the Rangers or the explosive ordnance specialists. They were calling for the woman everyone dismissed as just another mess hall worker. And what happened in the next 90 seconds would become the most analyzed combat footage in modern military history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The pre-dawn darkness at Forward Operating Base Sandstone carried the familiar weight of another routine morning in Afghanistan's Helmand province. Elena Rodriguez stood alone in the mess hall kitchen, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she prepared breakfast for 300 soldiers, who would wake in 2 hours expecting hot food and strong coffee. At 28 years old, she moved through the industrial kitchen with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to find purpose in precision, even when that precision involved measuring flour instead of calculating firing solutions. The kitchen itself told the story of military pragmatism. Stainless steel surfaces that had been scrubbed clean so many times they'd lost their original shine. Industrial refrigerators humming with the constant strain of keeping food fresh in 100-degree heat. And prep tables scarred by thousands of meals prepared under fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. Elena had arrived at 0400, same as every morning for the past 18 months, when the base was quiet and the only sounds were distant generators and the occasional rumble of convoy trucks heading out on patrol. Her uniform was regulation Army combat uniform in desert camouflage, but instead of the tactical vest and weapon that had once been her constant companions, she wore a food service apron that had seen better decades. The fabric was stained with months of kitchen duty, evidence of her current assignment preparing meals for soldiers, who barely acknowledged her existence beyond complaining when the coffee ran cold or the eggs got overcooked. Most of them had no idea that Elena Rodriguez had once been Sergeant First Class Santos, one of the top marksmen in her Ranger class and a specialist in close-quarters combat, who could clear a building faster than most soldiers could reload their weapons. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. 18 months ago, during what should have been a routine training exercise at Fort Benning, Elena had made a split-second decision that technically saved 3 lives but officially violated direct orders from a superior officer. The exercise had called for her team to clear a mock compound using prescribed tactics and predetermined entry points. But Elena had spotted something the instructors missed: a structural weakness in the building that would have sent her teammates directly into a collapse zone during breach entry. Instead of following the predetermined plan, she had called an audible, redirecting her team through an alternative route that kept them clear of danger. The building had indeed collapsed exactly where her teammates would have been positioned, and the 3 soldiers who would have been injured walked away without a scratch. But the review board focused on a different detail. Elena had countermanded a direct order from Lieutenant Morrison, the exercise supervisor, and had deviated from approved tactical procedures without authorization. The incident report described her actions as insubordination, masquerading as tactical intuition, evidence of an inability to function within established command structures under pressure. The Army had offered her a choice: accept voluntary reclassification to a non-combat specialty and retain her rank, or face formal disciplinary action that could result in demotion and possible discharge. Elena had chosen the path that kept her in uniform, even though it meant trading her rifle for kitchen utensils and her tactical expertise for food service regulations. They had allowed her to keep her rank technically, but rank without respect was just decoration on a uniform that no longer represented who she used to be. The truth about the training incident was more complicated than the official report suggested. Lieutenant Morrison had been pushing his soldiers hard that day, determined to prove his leadership capabilities to observers from higher command. When Elena had tried to point out the structural concerns during the mission briefing, Morrison had dismissed her observations as overcautiousness from someone afraid of taking necessary risks. The building collapse had vindicated her tactical assessment, but military bureaucracy rarely admitted when protocol was wrong and individual judgment was right. Elena had learned to accept that sometimes institutional loyalty mattered more than practical results. The Army needed soldiers who followed orders without question, and she had demonstrated a troubling tendency to prioritize immediate safety over command hierarchy. Better to have her preparing meals than making unauthorized decisions in combat situations where split-second choices could affect entire operations. The kitchen assignment at Forward Operating Base Sandstone had initially felt like exile, but Elena had approached it with the same methodical professionalism she had once applied to weapons maintenance and tactical planning. She learned industrial cooking techniques with the same intensity she had once studied ballistics and room-clearing procedures. If the Army wanted her to feed soldiers instead of fight alongside them, she would become the best food service specialist in the battalion. Master Sergeant Jake Thompson had made his opinion clear during her first week at the base. Elena was kitchen help, nothing more, someone who had washed out of real military service and landed in food prep because it was the only job that couldn't be screwed up by someone who couldn't follow simple instructions. Thompson commanded the base security detail and had no patience for former combat specialists who had proven they couldn't handle the pressure of actual military operations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The nickname Cookie had started as Thompson's idea of humor, a way of reminding Elena that her days of tactical significance were finished. Other soldiers had picked it up quickly, though most used it without malice. Cookie was just the woman who made sure breakfast was ready on time and occasionally helped with inventory management when supply convoys arrived. She was part of the background infrastructure that kept the base functioning, invisible until something went wrong with meal service. Elena had stopped correcting people who called her Cookie after the first month. Fighting over a nickname felt petty when there were more important battles to choose, and she had learned that drawing attention to herself usually resulted in additional duties that kept her away from the few aspects of base life that still felt meaningful. She preferred the early morning kitchen shifts when she could work alone, preparing food in silence while the rest of the base slept and dreamed of home. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now spent more time with knives than she had during her combat years, though these blades were designed for chopping vegetables rather than neutralizing threats. Elena had developed an almost meditative relationship with food preparation, finding satisfaction in the precise timing required to coordinate multiple dishes for hundreds of hungry soldiers. It wasn't the adrenaline rush of tactical operations, but it required similar attention to detail and the ability to manage multiple variables simultaneously under time pressure. Corporal Tommy Lou had been particularly vocal about his assessment of Elena's military value during a conversation he thought she couldn't hear. Sitting in the mess hall after evening chow, Lou had explained to his table mates that Cookie was probably someone who had never seen real action and had been assigned to kitchen duty because it was the only place she couldn't cause actual damage. Real soldiers, Lou had suggested, were out on patrol or standing guard duty while support personnel like Cookie handled the domestic tasks that kept everyone fed and comfortable. Elena had listened from behind the serving counter, cleaning pots. while Liu described her as the kind of soldier who joined the army for college benefits and tried to avoid any assignment that involved actual risk. His assessment wasn't unusual. Most of the soldiers at Forward Operating Base Sandstone had no reason to know about her ranger training or her combat experience before the incident that had derailed her career. To them, she was simply part of the support infrastructure, someone who ensured meals were prepared and served on schedule. The kitchen radio had been Elena's primary connection to base operations since her assignment began. She monitored communication, traffic while she worked, staying current on patrol schedules, convoy movements, and security briefings that she was no longer authorized to participate in directly. It was a habit from her tactical days, when situational awareness could mean the difference between mission success and casualty reports. Even though her current duties didn't require tactical knowledge, Elena couldn't shake the training that had made her constantly aware of everything happening around her. Forward Operating Base Sandstone sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills that provided natural defensive positions, but also created potential hiding spots for hostile forces, planning attacks on the installation. Elena had studied the terrain. During her off-duty hours, noting sight lines and approach routes with the same analytical eye she had once applied to combat planning. It was unnecessary for her current assignment, but old habits died hard and tactical thinking had become second nature after years of training. The base housed approximately 300 personnel, including infantry soldiers, support specialists, intelligence analysts, and medical staff. Most were deployed for 6-month rotations, though some specialized personnel like Elena stayed longer due to the continuity requirements of their positions. The mess hall served as one of the few gathering places where soldiers from different units interacted casually, making Elena's position surprisingly central to base morale, even though her role was technically peripheral to combat operations. Elena's workday typically began at 0400 and at around 1400, though she often volunteered for additional duties that kept her busy until evening. Staying active helped pass the time and prevented her from dwelling too much on the career she had lost or the tactical skills that were slowly atrophying from disuse. She had requested permission to maintain her marksmanship qualifications during off-duty hours, but Master Sergeant Thompson had denied the request, stating that food service personnel had no operational need for advanced weapons training. The denial had stung more than Elena had expected. Marksmanship had been one of her strongest skills during ranger training, and she had consistently scored in the top percentiles during qualification exercises. Losing access to weapons practice felt like another step in the gradual erosion of her military identity, a reminder that she was no longer considered capable of contributing to the base's primary mission of combat readiness. Staff Sergeant Rachel Kim ran the base armory and supervised weapons training for soldiers who were authorized to maintain combat proficiency. Kim had been polite but firm when Elena asked about participating in regular training exercises. Food service personnel, Kim explained, were not required to maintain the same readiness standards as combat soldiers, and range time was limited resource that needed to be allocated to personnel whose duties required advanced weapons proficiency. Elena had accepted the decision without argument, but she continued practicing her tactical skills in private. During her off-duty hours, she would walk the perimeter of the base, mentally cataloging defensive positions and potential weak points in their security arrangements. It was probably unnecessary, but the exercise helped her maintain the tactical mindset that had once defined her military service. The kitchen where Elena spent most of her time was located in the center of the base, adjacent to the mess hall and within easy walking distance of the command bunker and medical facilities. The position provided her with a unique perspective on base operations, since everyone passed through the mess hall at some point during their daily routine. She had learned to read the mood of the base by observing how soldiers interacted during meals and paying attention to conversations that revealed operational concerns or morale issues. Tonight felt different. Elena had noticed increased radio traffic during the evening hours, and several senior non-commissioned officers had spent longer than usual in the command bunker, during what should have been routine shift changes. Base Commander, Captain Marcus Webb, had canceled his usual evening appearance in the mess hall, and the intelligence staff had been working late into the night on analysis that typically concluded by 2100 hours. Elena finished her prep work for the morning meal service and began cleaning the kitchen equipment with the methodical thoroughness that had become her trademark. Every surface was sanitized, every utensil properly stored, every piece of equipment prepared for the next day's operations. The routine was comforting in its predictability, a series of tasks that could be completed successfully regardless of what was happening elsewhere on the base. The first explosion shattered that predictability like glass hitting concrete. The sound came from the direction of the supply depot, a deep rumbling that Elena felt in her chest before her brain processed what it meant. She dropped the industrial spatula she had been cleaning and moved toward the kitchen radio with the fluid efficiency of someone whose body remembered combat reflexes even when her mind tried to forget them. The base's emergency lighting system activated automatically, bathing the mess hall in red illumination that transformed familiar spaces into something alien and threatening. Elena's fingers found the radio controls with muscle memory that 18 months of kitchen duty hadn't erased. She switched to the primary tactical frequency and immediately heard the chaos that meant their quiet night had become something else entirely. Multiple voices overlapped in urgent transmissions, reports of contact and requests for backup, creating a symphony of controlled panic that Elena recognized from deployments where routine became lethal without warning. The voice of Sergeant First Class Mike O'Connor cut through the radio chatter with the authority of someone who had survived enough firefights to know the difference between confusion and crisis. Perimeter breach at Checkpoint 7. Multiple hostiles moving toward the main compound. We need immediate response from all available personnel. Elena felt her pulse quicken as O'Connor continued his report, describing at least 7 attackers who had somehow penetrated the outer security ring and were advancing on the central areas of the base. She reached for the tactical vest that wasn't there, her hand closing on empty air where equipment should have been hanging. The muscle memory was so strong that for a moment Elena forgot she was no longer authorized to carry combat gear or respond to security alerts. Her role during emergencies was to secure the kitchen facilities and wait for the all-clear signal from personnel whose job it was to handle actual threats. But Elena's training was screaming at her that something was wrong with the tactical picture O'Connor was describing. 7 attackers breaching perimeter security simultaneously suggested coordination and planning that went beyond opportunistic insurgent activity. This felt like a deliberate assault designed to achieve specific objectives, and the timing coincided with the increased intelligence activity she had observed throughout the evening. Captain Webb's voice joined the radio traffic, his tone carrying the controlled tension of a commander managing multiple crisis points simultaneously. All personnel not directly involved in security response are to remain in secure positions until further notice. The mess hall and kitchen facilities are designated as temporary rally points for non-combat personnel who require protected locations during the incident. Elena understood the logic behind the order. The mess hall was centrally located with multiple exits and communication equipment, making it an ideal coordination point for personnel who weren't trained for combat operations. But the designation also meant that other soldiers would start arriving at her location, people who might be injured or panicked and would need someone capable of maintaining order in a chaotic situation. The irony wasn't lost on her that the Army considered her unfit for combat operations, but perfectly suitable for managing frightened people during actual combat. Elena had always excelled at crisis management, whether that involved coordinating tactical movements under fire or organizing medical evacuations in contested territory. Her reclassification to food service hadn't changed her ability to think clearly under pressure, but it had eliminated most opportunities to demonstrate that capability. Lieutenant Colonel Diana Brooks appeared on the tactical frequency with updates from the Intelligence Center. Initial assessment suggests there's a coordinated assault targeting specific base infrastructure. All units maintain defensive positions and wait for further instructions before engaging. Elena noted the careful phrasing that suggested Brooks knew more about the attacker's objectives than she was sharing over open communications. The kitchen's location provided Elena with a unique acoustic perspective on the base's defensive response. She could hear vehicles moving through the compound as quick reaction forces deployed to threatened areas, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors as air support prepared to launch, and the sharp reports of small arms fire from the perimeter where security teams were engaging the infiltrators. Elena's tactical mind automatically began processing the audio information, building a mental map of how the engagement was developing across the base. The firing pattern suggested the attackers were moving in coordinated teams rather than acting as individual fighters, and the intensity of the gunfire indicated they were well armed and prepared for sustained combat. This wasn't a harassment attack or probe of defenses. Someone had planned this operation with specific goals and sufficient resources to achieve them. Master Sergeant Thompson's voice crackled over the radio with updates from the security control center. Hostile forces have split into multiple elements. Primary group moving toward command facilities. Secondary element advancing on the armory. All available personnel are to reinforce defensive positions immediately. Elena heard the strain in Thompson's voice and recognized the signs of someone trying to manage too many variables with insufficient resources. The first group of non-combat personnel began arriving at the mess hall within minutes of Webb's order. Medical technicians, administrative clerks, maintenance specialists, and other support personnel who had been awakened by the explosions and directed to seek shelter in the designated rally point. Elena watched them file through the entrance, noting the mixture of confusion and fear on faces illuminated by emergency lighting. Corporal Sarah Mitchell from the communications section looked around the mess hall with the wide-eyed expression of someone experiencing combat for the first time. She approached Elena with obvious relief at finding someone who appeared calm and in control of the situation. "Do you know what's happening out there?" Mitchell asked, her voice pitched higher than normal with stress that she was trying unsuccessfully to hide. Elena gestured toward the radio setup where she had been monitoring tactical communications. "Coordinated assault on multiple points around the base. Security forces are responding, but it's going to take time to neutralize all the threats." She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who understood combat operations, though she didn't mention that her knowledge came from years of participating in similar situations rather than just observing them. More personnel continued arriving at the mess hall as word spread about the designated rally point. Elena found herself naturally taking charge of the growing group, organizing them into defensive positions near the exits and establishing communication protocols that would keep everyone informed about the developing situation outside. Her leadership emerged organically as people recognized competence and gravitated towards someone who seemed to know what she was doing. Private First Class Danny Rodriguez, no relation despite the shared surname, positioned himself near one of the windows where he could observe the compound while remaining concealed from potential threats. Elena noticed that Rodriguez carried himself with the alertness of someone who had combat experience, and she mentally cataloged him as potentially useful if the situation deteriorated further. The administrative personnel were less prepared for the reality of being under attack. Specialist Jennifer Park from the finance office sat in a corner looking pale and shaken, while Sergeant Tom Wilson from Supply Logistics kept checking his watch as if the passage of time might somehow resolve the crisis automatically. Elena recognized the signs of people whose military service had never included preparation for actual combat, and she made mental notes about who could be relied upon if circumstances required more active response. Staff Sergeant Kim's voice joined the radio chatter with reports from the armory. Hostile element has been repelled from weapons storage facility, but they achieved entry to secondary ammunition storage before withdrawal. Conducting damage assessment now. Elena felt a chill at the implications of that report. Attackers who targeted ammunition storage were either trying to resupply themselves for extended operations or attempting to deny resources to defending forces. The tactical picture continued developing as various unit leaders reported their status and positions. Elena listened carefully to each transmission, building a comprehensive understanding of how the engagement was progressing across different areas of the base. Her analytical skills, honed by years of tactical training, automatically processed the information and identified patterns that might not be obvious to people focused on their immediate responsibilities. Something bothered her about the attackers' approach routes and target selection. The initial breach at Checkpoint 7 had drawn security forces toward the perimeter, but the subsequent movement toward central facilities suggested the perimeter assault might have been a diversion designed to create opportunities elsewhere. Elena had seen similar tactics used by insurgent forces who understood that American military doctrine emphasized rapid response to contact, creating predictable patterns that could be exploited by sophisticated opponents. Lieutenant Morrison's voice appeared on the frequency with updates from the motor pool area. Vehicles have been secured, and quick reaction force is preparing to deploy in support of perimeter defense. Estimated time to full deployment is 15 minutes. Elena noted the timeline and wondered if 15 minutes would be sufficient given the apparent coordination and preparation demonstrated by the attacking force. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows throughout the mess hall, transforming familiar furniture and equipment into potential concealment positions that Elena evaluated automatically. Her training kept asserting itself despite her official role as kitchen personnel, and she found herself thinking about fields of fire and defensive positions, even though she had no weapon and no authorization to engage in combat operations. Corporal Yu appeared at the mess hall entrance, his earlier confidence about real soldiers and support personnel notably absent as he looked around nervously for guidance about what to do during an actual emergency. Elena watched him scan the assembled group and noticed the moment when his eyes registered her presence with something that might have been relief, though his pride prevented him from openly acknowledging that Cookie might be someone worth listening to during a crisis. The sound of gunfire was getting closer to the central compound, and Elena could distinguish between the sharp crack of M4 rifles used by base security forces and the deeper reports of a K-47 variants favored by insurgent groups. The acoustic signature suggested that combat was moving through different areas of the base as attackers and defenders maneuvered for tactical advantage. Captain Webb's voice returned to the radio with an edge that Elena recognized as barely controlled frustration. Security teams are reporting that hostile forces appear to have detailed knowledge of base layout and defensive procedures. This was not a random assault. The implication hung in the air like smoke from burning equipment. Someone had provided the attackers with intelligence about Forward Operating Base Sandstone's vulnerabilities and operational patterns. Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align in her mind. The increased intelligence activity she had observed throughout the evening, the timing of the assault, and now evidence that the attackers possessed inside knowledge about base operations. This felt like the culmination of a longer intelligence collection effort, and the assault itself might be designed to achieve objectives beyond simple destruction or harassment. The radio crackled with another transmission from O'Connor, his voice tight with the strain of managing combat operations under pressure. "We've got movement in Sector 4. Appears to be a flanking element trying to reach the command bunker from the blind side." Elena's tactical training immediately visualized the approach routes in Sector 4 and recognized the vulnerability that O'Connor was describing. Sector 4 included the maintenance areas and storage facilities that provided concealed approach routes to the central command complex. Elena had walked those areas during her off-duty reconnaissance and knew that someone with detailed knowledge of the base layout could use the buildings and equipment to avoid detection until they were within striking distance of critical facilities. More concerning was the realization that an attack on the command bunker would target the nerve center of the base's defensive operations. If the attackers could neutralize or capture the command structure, they could effectively paralyze the entire defensive response and achieve objectives that would normally require much larger forces. Elena found herself calculating response times and defensive options with the automatic precision of someone whose brain had been trained to process tactical problems. The soldiers currently defending the command complex were positioned to repel direct assault from the primary approaches, but a flanking attack through Sector 4 would catch them with inadequate coverage of alternative routes. The assembled non-combat personnel in the mess hall were looking increasingly nervous as the sounds of fighting drew closer to their location. Elena realized that someone needed to take charge of the situation before panic set in and people started making decisions based on fear rather than tactical sense. Her official role might be food service, but her actual capabilities were exactly what the situation required. She moved to the center of the group and spoke with quiet authority that cut through the nervous chatter. Everyone needs to stay calm and follow instructions. We're in a secure location with multiple exits and good communication equipment. The security forces know where we are and will keep us informed about when it's safe to move. Private Rodriguez looked up from his position near the window with an expression that suggested he recognized military competence when he heard it. Elena noticed that several other people had turned toward her with the automatic deference that soldiers showed to someone demonstrating leadership under pressure. The radio erupted with urgent transmissions as the tactical situation continued evolving. Multiple units were reporting contact with hostile forces, and it was becoming clear that the attackers had achieved their initial objective of penetrating the base's defensive perimeter and creating chaos among the defending forces. The question now was whether they could be contained before they reached their ultimate targets. Elena listened to each transmission with the focused attention of someone whose survival had once depended on understanding rapidly changing tactical situations. The patterns emerging from the radio traffic suggested that whoever had planned this assault understood American military doctrine well enough to anticipate and counter standard defensive responses. Staff Sergeant Kim's voice crackled over the frequency with another report that made Elena's blood run cold. Armory reports that specialized equipment was specifically targeted during the breach. Night vision devices, communication gear, and demolition supplies are missing. The attackers hadn't just been trying to resupply themselves. They had stolen equipment that would make them significantly more dangerous during subsequent phases of their operation. The implications were staggering. Attackers equipped with American night vision technology and communications equipment would be able to operate with impunity in darkness and coordinate their movements with the same efficiency as defending forces. The theft of demolition supplies suggested they planned to target specific infrastructure with precision rather than relying on small arms fire alone. Elena realized that the tactical balance was shifting in favor of the attackers, and the soldiers currently defending Forward Operating Base Sandstone might not have sufficient resources to contain a threat that was growing more sophisticated. By the minute, the stolen equipment would force defenders to assume that their opponents could see in the dark, intercept communications, and destroy hardened targets with military-grade explosives. Captain Webb's voice returned to the radio with an announcement that confirmed Elena's worst fears. All personnel are advised that hostile forces have acquired advanced tactical equipment from the armory breach. Assume compromised communications and enhanced enemy capabilities until further notice. The measured tone couldn't disguise the fact that their situation had just become significantly more dangerous. The mess hall felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in around the assembled group of support personnel, who were suddenly confronting the reality that their safe rear area assignment had become something much more serious. Elena watched faces around the room and saw the moment when people began understanding that this wasn't just an incident that would be resolved by someone else. They were potentially in real danger, and their survival might depend on decisions made in the next few minutes. Elena's mind was already working through contingency plans and defensive options, her tactical training asserting itself despite her official role as kitchen personnel. She knew the layout of the base better than anyone realized, had observed operational patterns for months, and understood the strengths and weaknesses of their current position better than most of the people who were supposed to be making strategic decisions. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice belonged to someone Elena didn't recognize. The transmission was brief and chilling in its implications. "Command bunker, this is Overwatch. We have eyes on multiple hostile elements moving toward your position using covered approaches." Elena felt her stomach drop as she realized that the attack was entering its next phase, and the command structure that everyone was depending on for coordination was about to come under direct assault. The transmission that changed everything came at 0-2-15 hours, cutting through the tactical chatter with the kind of precision that made Elena's blood freeze in her veins. The voice was calm, professional, speaking clear English with the slight accent that suggested education in American military schools. "Forward Operating Base Sandstone, this is Sierra 7. We are prepared to discuss terms for the safe evacuation of non-combatant personnel currently sheltering in your mess hall facility." The radio went silent for 3 heartbeats that felt like hours. Elena felt every person in the room turn toward the communication equipment as if the radio itself had become a venomous snake coiled on the table. The implications crashed over her like ice water. The attackers knew exactly where the non-combat personnel were located, knew the designation of their shelter area, and possessed enough confidence in their tactical position to initiate negotiations rather than simply continuing their assault. Captain Webb's response carried the controlled fury of someone who understood that his operational security had been completely compromised. "Sierra 7, you are engaging in hostile action against United States military forces. Identify yourself and state your intentions." The formal language couldn't mask the fact that Webb was stalling for time while trying to understand how extensively the base's communications and positions had been penetrated. Elena's analytical mind was already processing the tactical implications of what they had just heard. The attackers possessed detailed intelligence about personnel locations, facility designations, and probably operational procedures. This wasn't opportunistic insurgent activity. Someone had spent months collecting information about Forward Operating Base Sandstone, mapping vulnerabilities, and planning an operation designed to achieve specific objectives with minimal resources. The response from Sierra 7 came with the patient tone of someone who held all the advantages and knew it. "Captain Webb, we have been monitoring your communications since the operation began. We know your defensive positions, your response times, and your current resource allocation. Our objective is not the destruction of your facility, but the retrieval of specific intelligence materials currently stored in your classified documentation center." Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a random assault or harassment attack. Someone wanted something specific from Forward Operating Base Sandstone, and they had planned an elaborate operation to create exactly the conditions necessary to retrieve it. The timing, the coordination, the detailed knowledge of base operations. Everything pointed to intelligence preparation that had taken months or possibly years to develop. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks's voice cut into the conversation with the sharp edge of someone whose professional paranoia had just been vindicated. Sierra 7, you are in violation of multiple international laws governing armed conflict. Any harm to personnel under protection will result in severe consequences. Elena noted that Brooks was trying to establish legal frameworks that might provide some protection for the people currently trapped in various locations around the base. The attacker's response revealed a level of sophistication that made Elena's tactical assessment even more grim. Colonel Brooks, we are familiar with the relevant legal frameworks and have no intention of harming personnel who do not interfere with our operational objectives. However, we require assurance that base security forces will not attempt to interfere with our retrieval operations. Elena realized that the attackers were essentially holding the non-combat personnel hostage while they completed whatever intelligence collection mission had brought them to Forward Operating Base Sandstone. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Interfere with their operations, and people would die. Allow them to complete their objectives, and everyone might survive the night. Master Sergeant Thompson's voice joined the radio traffic with barely controlled rage. You want to negotiate? Then let's talk about you surrendering before this gets any worse for you. Elena could hear the frustration of someone whose tactical training emphasized aggressive response to threats, but who was being forced to consider diplomatic solutions by circumstances beyond his control. Sierra 7's response demonstrated the kind of tactical patience that came from superior planning and resource allocation. Sergeant Thompson, we have no interest in prolonged engagement with your security forces. Our operation will be completed within 30 minutes if we encounter no interference. After that time, we will withdraw and leave your personnel unharmed. Elena found herself calculating the timeline and wondering what could be retrieved from a classified documentation center in 30 minutes. Either the attackers knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it, or they possessed equipment capable of rapidly copying large volumes of classified material. Both possibilities suggested intelligence preparation that went far beyond anything a typical insurgent group could accomplish. The assembled non-combat personnel in the mess hall were listening to the radio exchange with expressions that ranged from confusion to outright terror. Most of them had never been involved in situations where enemy forces held tactical advantages sufficient to dictate terms to American military units. Elena recognized the signs of people whose worldview was being fundamentally challenged by circumstances they had never imagined possible. Specialist Park approached Elena with the wide-eyed expression of someone seeking reassurance from anyone who appeared to understand what was happening. Are they really going to let us go if the base commander agrees to their terms? Elena considered her response carefully, weighing the value of honest assessment against the need to prevent panic among people who had no training for their current situation. They're saying they will, Elena replied quietly, but their actual intentions depend on factors we can't evaluate from here. What we can control is staying calm, following instructions, and being ready to respond appropriately if the situation changes. She spoke with the measured confidence of someone who had learned to manage uncertainty during previous deployments, where survival often depended on making good decisions with incomplete information. Captain Webb's voice returned to the radio, with the reluctant tone of someone exploring options he didn't like. Sierra 7, what assurances can you provide regarding the safety of personnel currently in protective locations? Elena noted that Webb was neither accepting nor rejecting the attacker's terms, but trying to establish parameters that might protect his people while he evaluated alternatives. The response revealed another layer of the attacker's sophisticated planning. Captain, we have no interest in harming personnel who remain in designated safe areas and do not attempt to interfere with our operations. However, any movement of security forces toward the documentation center will be considered hostile action and responded to accordingly. Elena felt the tactical noose tightening around everyone on the base. The attackers had essentially created a standoff where any aggressive response by defending forces would result in casualties among the people they were supposed to protect. It was psychological warfare combined with tactical superiority, designed to paralyze the decision-making process of commanders who were trained to protect their personnel above all other considerations. Private Rodriguez moved closer to Elena's position near the radio, his expression suggesting someone who had recognized competence and wanted to be near it during a crisis. "Do you think they really know where everyone is located?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched low enough to avoid alarming other people in the room. Elena nodded grimly. "They've demonstrated knowledge of our personnel locations, communication protocols, and facility designations that could only come from extensive intelligence collection. Either they have inside access to our operational information, or they've been conducting surveillance for months without being detected." Neither possibility suggested that this was anything other than a carefully planned operation by sophisticated opponents. The radio crackled with another transmission from O'Connor, his voice carrying the strain of someone managing multiple crisis points simultaneously. "Command, we've got movement in sectors 3 and 5. Appears to be coordinated withdrawal from perimeter positions back towards central facilities." Elena's tactical training immediately understood the implications. The attackers were consolidating their forces around their primary objective while maintaining enough pressure to prevent effective countermeasures. Staff Sergeant Kim's voice joined the frequency with an update that confirmed Elena's assessment. "Armory security reports that hostile forces are using stolen night vision equipment to coordinate movements in darkness. Our response capabilities are severely limited without similar technology." The equipment theft had achieved exactly what Elena had feared, creating tactical parity between attackers and defenders in conditions that should have favored the defending forces. Elena found herself thinking about the base layout and wondering how many people really understood the vulnerability of their current situation. The mess hall provided excellent protection against small arms fire and had multiple exits, but it was also isolated from other defensive positions and depended on external security for protection. If the attackers decided that eliminating the non-combat personnel served their objectives better than preserving them, everyone in the room would be trapped with limited options for escape or defense. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled over the radio with updates from the motor pool area. "Quick Reaction Force is prepared to deploy, but requires clarification of rules of engagement given current hostage situation." Elena heard the frustration of someone whose training emphasized decisive action, but who was being forced to consider diplomatic solutions by circumstances that favored the enemy. Sierra 7's next transmission revealed another dimension of their operational sophistication. "Motor pool personnel should be advised that we have observation on all vehicle positions and anti-armor capabilities sufficient to prevent deployment of mechanized response." Elena realized that the attackers had not only penetrated the base's perimeter defenses but had positioned themselves to control tactical movement throughout the facility. The psychological pressure was becoming almost unbearable. Elena could see it in the faces around her as people processed the implications of being held hostage by forces that seemed to anticipate every defensive measure and counter it with superior planning. This wasn't the kind of enemy engagement that anyone had trained for, and the normal confidence that came from superior firepower and tactical doctrine was being systematically undermined by opponents who had found ways to neutralize American military advantages. Captain Webb's voice returned with the carefully controlled tone of someone who's running out of options and knew it. "Sierra 7, we require additional time to evaluate your proposal and coordinate with higher command authority." Elena heard the implicit plea for more time to develop alternatives, but she suspected that the attackers understood the delaying tactic as clearly as anyone else monitoring the conversation. The response came with the patient finality of someone whose timeline was dictated by operational requirements rather than diplomatic convenience. Captain Webb, you have 15 minutes to decide whether you will allow us to complete our mission without interference, or whether you prefer to test our resolve regarding the safety of non-combatant personnel. We will begin our withdrawal preparations. Regardless of your decision, but the outcome for your people depends on the level of cooperation we receive. Elena felt the countdown begin in her mind. 15 minutes to determine whether everyone in the mess hall would survive the night or become casualties in an engagement that had already demonstrated the tactical superiority of their opponents. She looked around the room at faces that were beginning to understand that their survival might depend on decisions being made by people who had never planned for this kind of situation. The radio traffic continued with status reports from various radio traffic continued with status reports from VARs positions around the base, but Elena noticed that the tone was shifting from tactical coordination to damage assessment and resource preservation. The defenders were being forced into reactive postures by attackers who controlled the initiative and had demonstrated the capability to counter every defensive measure attempted so far. Corporal Mitchell approached Elena with the desperate expression of someone looking for hope in a situation that seemed increasingly hopeless. "Is there anything we can do to help the security forces?" she asked quietly. Elena considered the question and realized that the people in the mess hall represented resources that weren't being utilized effectively in the current tactical equation. Elena looked at the assembled group and began mentally cataloging their capabilities and potential contributions to a defensive effort. Most were support personnel without combat training, but several had specialized skills that might prove valuable if circumstances required more active response. The question was whether circumstances would develop in ways that made such response necessary or advisable. Master Sergeant Thompson's voice crackled over the radio, with an edge that suggested someone whose patience was reaching its limits. "Sierra 7, you need to understand that we don't negotiate with hostile forces. You've got 5 minutes to begin withdrawing from this facility before we implement kinetic response regardless of your threats." Elena felt her heart rate spike as she realized that Thompson was essentially calling the attackers' bluff, gambling with the lives of everyone in protective locations based on his assessment that the enemy wouldn't follow through on their implicit threats. It was the kind of decision that could either break the psychological advantage held by the attackers or result in casualties among the people Thompson was supposed to be protecting. The response from Sierra 7 carried a note of disappointment that made Elena's blood run cold. "Sergeant Thompson, we had hoped for more rational cooperation from professional military personnel. Since you appear determined to test our resolve, we will demonstrate our commitment to completing this mission, regardless of your interference." Elena realized that the negotiation phase was ending and the situation was about to become significantly more dangerous for everyone involved. The attackers had made their position clear, and Thompson had essentially forced them to prove their willingness to harm non-combatant personnel rather than withdraw without achieving their objectives. Private Rodriguez moved to a position where he could observe the compound through one of the mess hall windows, his body language suggesting someone who understood that the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Elena noticed that several other people were beginning to position themselves near exits and communication equipment, instinctively preparing for whatever came next. The radio erupted with the sound of gunfire and explosions much closer to the central compound than anything they had heard previously. Elena recognized the distinctive reports of grenades and small arms fire, suggesting that the attackers were implementing whatever demonstration of resolve they had promised in response to Thompson's ultimatum. Captain Webb's voice cut through the chaos with barely controlled panic. "All stations, we have detonations in the command complex and multiple casualties reported. Medical personnel respond to the command bunker immediately." Elena felt the tactical picture collapse as she realized that the attackers had just eliminated the nerve center of the base's defensive coordination. The implications were staggering. Without centralized command and control, the various security elements would be forced to operate independently without coordination or unified tactical direction. The attackers had just decapitated the defensive response and created conditions where they could complete their mission without effective interference. Elena looked around the mess hall and realized that everyone in the room was looking at her, with expressions that ranged from confusion to outright terror. In the absence of external authority and guidance, people were instinctively gravitating toward whoever seemed most capable of providing direction during a crisis that had just become exponentially more dangerous. Staff Sergeant Kim's voice crackled over the radio with the kind of report that confirmed Elena's worst fears. Command bunker has suffered direct hit from explosive device. Multiple casualties including senior command staff. We need immediate medical support and tactical coordination from any available personnel. Elena understood that the tactical balance had just shifted decisively in favor of the attackers. With the command structure eliminated and security forces operating without coordination, the base's defensive capabilities had been reduced to individual units, acting independently without unified direction or strategic guidance. The countdown was still running in her mind, but the parameters had changed completely. Instead of 15 minutes to negotiate a peaceful resolution, they now had an unknown amount of time before attackers who had demonstrated their willingness to kill American military personnel completed whatever mission had brought them to Forward Operating Base Sandstone. Elena realized that the people in the mess hall were no longer protected non-combatants, waiting for someone else to resolve their situation. They were potential casualties in an engagement where the normal rules had been suspended and survival might depend on capabilities that went far beyond following instructions and staying calm. The radio crackled with Sierra 7's voice, now carrying the tone of someone whose patience had been exhausted by unnecessary resistance. Base personnel, you have demonstrated that rational cooperation is not possible. We will complete our mission using whatever means prove necessary. Personnel who interfere with our operations will be considered hostile combatants and treated accordingly. Elena felt the last constraints on the situation dissolve as the attackers essentially declared open season on anyone who might threaten their objectives. The negotiation phase was over, the command structure was eliminated, and everyone on the base was now operating in a tactical environment where the normal protections and procedures no longer applied. She looked around the mess hall one more time and realized that the 18 months of kitchen duty and enforced passivity were about to end. The tactical situation required capabilities that she possessed but hadn't been authorized to use, and the survival of everyone in the room might depend on whether she was willing to violate every regulation that had kept her safely confined to food service duties. Elena Rodriguez was about to remember why they had once called her Sergeant First Class Santos, and why her tactical instructors had considered her one of the most promising soldiers they had ever trained. The only question was whether 18 months of chopping vegetables had dulled the reflexes that had once made her dangerous enough to require careful supervision by people who understood what she was capable of accomplishing when circumstances removed all restrictions on her actions. The explosion that shattered the emergency lighting came from directly outside the mess hall, close enough that Elena felt the concussion wave through the floor beneath her feet. Glass fragments from the windows scattered across the room as the distinctive whistle of incoming rounds began impacting the exterior walls. The attackers had abandoned their negotiation strategy and were now implementing direct action against anyone who might interfere with their mission completion. Elena's body moved before her conscious mind processed the threat, dropping to a combat crouch and scanning the room for defensive positions, while her brain automatically calculated fields of fire and cover options. 18 months of kitchen duty hadn't erased muscle memory that had been drilled into her during countless hours of close-quarters combat training, and her hands reached instinctively for weapons that weren't there. while her eyes mapped escape routes and tactical advantages. The people around her were reacting with the confusion and panic of individuals who had never experienced incoming fire at close range. Specialist Park was pressed against the far wall with her hands over her ears, while Sergeant Wilson was crawling toward the kitchen area without any apparent destination or tactical purpose. Elena realized that without immediate leadership and direction, the group would dissolve into chaos that would make everyone more vulnerable to whatever the attackers planned next. "Get everyone away from the windows and spread out across the room," Elena commanded, her voice carrying the automatic authority of someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this kind of situation. "Don't bunch up in corners where one grenade can take out multiple people. Move now." Private Rodriguez responded immediately, helping Mitchell and Park move toward positions that offered better protection from incoming fire. Elena noted that Rodriguez moved with the controlled efficiency of someone who had combat experience, and she mentally filed him as potentially useful if circumstances required organized resistance rather than passive shelter. The radio crackled with fragmentary transmissions from various positions around the base, but the communication traffic had devolved into individual units, reporting contact and requesting support that was no longer available from the eliminated command structure. Elena listened to the chaos and realized that the base's defensive response had fragmented into isolated pockets of resistance without coordination or strategic direction. Corporal Liu stumbled through the mess hall entrance, with blood streaming from a head wound and the wild-eyed expression of someone who had just survived close-quarters combat. Elena moved to intercept him before he could spread panic among the other sheltering personnel, noting that Liu's tactical vest was missing and his weapon was nowhere to be seen. "What's your status, Corporal?" Elena asked, using the calm, professional tone that military personnel were trained to respond to during crisis situations. Liu focused on her with obvious relief at finding someone who appeared competent and in control of the deteriorating situation. "They hit the command bunker with explosives and small arms fire," Liu reported, his voice shaking with adrenaline and shock. "Captain Webb is down, maybe dead. Thompson was trying to coordinate defensive positions when I lost contact with everyone else. The attackers are moving through the compound systematically, clearing buildings and eliminating resistance." Elena felt the tactical picture crystallize with brutal clarity. The attackers weren't just retrieving intelligence materials from the documentation center. They were conducting a comprehensive operation designed to eliminate anyone who might interfere with their mission or provide testimony about their methods and objectives. This wasn't a smash-and-grab intelligence collection. It was a systematic elimination of witnesses combined with data retrieval. "How many attackers did you observe during the assault on the command bunker?" Elena asked, her analytical mind automatically processing Liu's report for actionable intelligence. Liu considered the question with the careful concentration of someone trying to provide accurate information under extreme stress. "At least 4, possibly 6. They were using the night vision equipment stolen from the armory, coordinating movements with hand signals, and demonstrating familiarity with our defensive positions that suggested extensive reconnaissance." Liu paused, then continued with obvious reluctance. "They weren't taking prisoners. Anyone who couldn't escape was eliminated on sight." Elena understood that the rules of engagement had changed completely. The attackers had abandoned any pretense of limiting casualties to operational necessities and were now implementing what amounted to a scorched earth policy designed to eliminate evidence and witnesses. Everyone on Forward Operating Base Sandstone was now a potential casualty, regardless of their combat status or role in defensive operations. The implications were staggering. Elena looked around the mess hall at faces that were beginning to understand that their survival was no longer guaranteed by international law or military convention. They were trapped in a facility with attackers who possessed superior tactical advantages and had demonstrated willingness to kill anyone who might compromise their mission objectives. Staff Sergeant Kim's voice crackled over the radio with a transmission that confirmed Elena's assessment. Armory position has been overrun. Multiple casualties. Hostile forces are now equipped with additional weapons and explosives from our storage facility. Elena realized that the attackers had just acquired enough firepower to eliminate any remaining pockets of resistance without difficulty. The tactical balance had shifted so completely in favor of the attackers that conventional defensive measures were no longer viable. Elena began considering alternatives that went beyond passive shelter and reactive defense, options that would require capabilities she wasn't officially authorized to employ, but might be necessary for the survival of everyone. In the mess hall, Private Rodriguez approached Elena with the expression of someone who had recognized competence and was seeking guidance from the most qualified person available. The emergency exits on the north side of the building lead directly toward the areas where the attackers were operating, he observed quietly. If we need to evacuate this position, our options are limited. Elena nodded, acknowledging Rodriguez's tactical assessment while her mind calculated alternatives. The south exit leads toward the vehicle maintenance area, which offers concealed movement routes but also potential ambush positions. The east exit provides direct access to open ground, but no cover for approximately 200 meters. Neither option offered ideal circumstances for moving non-combat personnel under hostile fire. The sound of approaching footsteps and voices, speaking in low tones, reached Elena's ears from outside the mess hall. She recognized the controlled communication patterns of military personnel coordinating tactical movements. But the voices weren't speaking English, and the cadence suggested foreign training and operational procedures. The attackers were conducting a systematic search of the central compound, and the mess hall was clearly on their target list. Elena realized that the time for passive shelter and hoping for rescue had expired. The attackers were coming. They possessed overwhelming tactical advantages, and everyone in the mess hall would be eliminated unless someone took action that went far beyond the normal expectations for food service personnel caught in combat situations. She moved to the kitchen area where her knowledge of the facility's layout and her familiarity with available equipment might provide options that weren't obvious to people whose primary focus was finding hiding places. Elena's tactical training was asserting itself with increasing intensity as her survival instincts overrode 18 months of enforced passivity and bureaucratic restrictions. The industrial kitchen contained equipment and supplies that could be weaponized by someone with sufficient knowledge and desperation. Elena's eyes cataloged propane tanks, industrial chemicals, sharp implements, and electrical equipment that could be repurposed for defensive applications by someone whose training had included improvised weapons and unconventional tactics. More importantly, the kitchen connected to service areas and utility tunnels that most people didn't know existed. Elena had discovered the maintenance access points during her early morning shifts when she had explored areas of the facility that weren't normally occupied during her working hours. The tunnels provided concealed movement routes that might allow evacuation of personnel without exposure to hostile observation. Corporal Mitchell approached Elena with the desperate expression of someone whose world had collapsed and who was looking for anyone who might provide hope or direction. "Is there anything we can do besides wait for them to find us?" Mitchell asked, her voice barely above a whisper as the sounds of approaching searchers grew closer to their location. Elena looked at Mitchell and realized that the question represented more than individual desperation. Everyone in the mess hall was looking at her with expressions that suggested they had recognized that their survival might depend on capabilities that went beyond standard operating procedures and official authorization levels. The decision crystallized in Elena's mind with the clarity that came from training and experience that had been suppressed but never eliminated. She was the most qualified person in the room to organize resistance against the approaching threat. and the survival of everyone present might depend on whether she was willing to violate every regulation that had kept her safely confined to non-combat duties. Elena Rodriguez was about to demonstrate why her tactical instructors had once considered her exceptional enough to require careful supervision. The 18 months of kitchen duty were ending, and Sergeant First Class Santos was about to remember exactly what she was capable of accomplishing when circumstances removed all restrictions on her actions. "Stay low and follow me," Elena commanded, her voice carrying the automatic authority of someone whose training had prepared her for leadership under combat conditions. "We're going to use service tunnels to reach a position where we can observe the attackers' movements and develop options for organized response." Private Rodriguez responded immediately, gathering Mitchell and the other personnel who were capable of movement, while Elena opened the access panel to the maintenance tunnel system. The space was cramped and poorly lit, but it provided concealed routes that connected various areas of the base without exposure to hostile observation. Elena led the group through passages that she had memorized during months of early morning exploration, moving with the confident efficiency of someone who understood that navigation errors in hostile territory could be fatal. Behind her, the sound of forced entry into the mess hall confirmed that the attackers had reached their former position and were conducting systematic searches for personnel who might have escaped initial detection. The maintenance tunnels emerged near the vehicle maintenance facility, providing access to equipment and supplies that offered significantly more tactical options than the passive shelter they had abandoned. Elena's mind was already calculating possibilities as her training reasserted itself with increasing intensity. The maintenance facility contained welding equipment, industrial tools, vehicle parts, and fuel supplies that could be weaponized by someone with sufficient knowledge and determination. More importantly, it provided defensive positions and observation points that would allow assessment of the attackers' numbers, equipment, and tactical procedures. Elena positioned the group in concealed locations throughout the facility while she moved to an observation point that provided clear sight lines across the central compound. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about the tactical situation and the sophistication of their opponents. 7 attackers were moving through the base with the coordinated precision of professional military personnel conducting urban warfare operations. They were equipped with American night vision devices, communication equipment, and weapons that had been acquired during their assault on the armory. Their movement patterns demonstrated intimate familiarity with the base layout and defensive positions that could only have come from extensive intelligence preparation. Elena watched the team systematically clear buildings using tactics that had been developed by American Special Operations Forces and refined through years of combat experience in urban environments. These weren't insurgent fighters using improvised methods. They were professionals implementing techniques that required extensive training and operational experience. The leader of the attacking force was coordinating movements using hand signals and communication procedures that Elena recognized from her own tactical training. She observed him directing team members toward specific objectives with the efficiency of someone who possessed detailed knowledge of the facility's operational patterns and vulnerability points. More concerning was the realization that the attackers were implementing a timeline that suggested they had specific extraction arrangements and knew exactly how long they could remain at Forward Operating Base Sandstone before external response forces arrived. This wasn't an opportunistic assault. It was a carefully planned operation with predetermined objectives and coordinated support. Elena returned to the concealed group and realized that everyone was looking at her with expressions that ranged from desperate hope to absolute trust in her judgment. They had recognized that she possessed capabilities that went far beyond her official role, and their survival might depend on whether she was willing to employ those capabilities, regardless of regulations and authorization levels. The tactical situation required immediate action. The attackers would complete their search of the central compound within minutes and begin systematic clearance of outlying facilities. The maintenance area would be searched, and everyone hiding there would be eliminated unless someone created conditions that disrupted the attacker's operational timeline and tactical advantages. Elena's mind was working through options with the analytical precision that had made her exceptional during tactical training. The attackers possessed superior firepower and equipment, but they were operating in an environment where Elena had advantages they couldn't anticipate. She knew the facility better than anyone, understood the location of supplies and equipment that could be weaponized, and had observed their operational patterns long enough to identify potential vulnerabilities. More importantly, Elena possessed combat training and experience that the attackers didn't know she had. They expected to encounter food service personnel and support staff who would either hide or surrender when confronted. They weren't prepared for organized resistance from someone whose tactical capabilities matched or exceeded their own. Elena began issuing instructions with the quiet authority of someone whose training had prepared her for command responsibilities under combat conditions. Rodriguez, you're going to help me create diversionary explosions using propane tanks and electrical equipment. Mitchell, gather all the communications equipment you can find so we can monitor their tactical frequencies and coordinate with any surviving security personnel. The plan that formed in Elena's mind was audacious enough to work precisely because it violated every expectation the attackers had about American defensive capabilities and personnel assignments. They had eliminated the command structure and neutralized organized resistance, but they weren't prepared for individual initiative from someone whose official role suggested incompetence in tactical situations. Elena moved through the maintenance facility with increasing confidence as her tactical training reasserted complete control over her actions and decision-making processes. 18 months of enforced passivity were ending, and the person who had once been considered exceptional enough to require careful supervision was about to demonstrate exactly why her instructors had been concerned about her potential for independent action. The attackers had made the mistake of assuming that eliminating official command authority would prevent organized resistance from remaining personnel. They were about to learn that some people were dangerous enough to require constant supervision precisely because they were capable of accomplishing objectives that exceeded their official authorization and training requirements. Elena Rodriguez was no longer Cookie, the dismissed food service worker who prepared meals and stayed out of everyone's way. She was Sergeant First Class Santos, tactical specialist and close-quarters combat expert, operating without restrictions or oversight. In an environment where survival depended on capabilities that had been carefully suppressed for 18 months. The maintenance facility became her command center as Elena coordinated preparations for an engagement that would demonstrate why her tactical instructors had once considered her one of the most promising soldiers they had ever trained. The attackers were about to encounter resistance from someone whose competence exceeded their intelligence estimates by several orders of magnitude. Elena checked her improvised weapons and communication equipment one final time, then moved toward the position where she would engage 7 professional military personnel in combat that would be analyzed by intelligence services for years afterward. In 90 seconds, she would eliminate threats that had overwhelmed an entire forward operating base, using nothing more than tactical knowledge, improvised weapons, and the kind of individual initiative that had once made her supervisors nervous about her potential for independent action. The woman they had dismissed as just a cook was about to remind everyone why some soldiers were considered dangerous enough to require constant supervision, and why tactical competence was a capability that couldn't be eliminated by bureaucratic reclassification or 18 months of kitchen duty. Elena Rodriguez was about to demonstrate exactly what happened when circumstances forced her to remember who she really was and what she was actually capable of accomplishing when all restrictions on her actions were finally removed. Elena's Hands moved with surgical precision as she prepared the maintenance facility for what her tactical training recognized as an asymmetric engagement against superior numbers with professional military capabilities. The industrial welding torch became an improvised flame weapon. Propane tanks transformed into directional explosives, and electrical conduits were reconfigured to create disabling power surges that would neutralize the attacker's stolen night vision equipment at precisely the right moment. Every movement carried the fluid efficiency of someone whose muscle memory had been honed through thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training, tactical exercises that had prepared her for exactly this kind of situation where individual competence would determine survival outcomes for multiple personnel. Elena's analytical mind calculated timing sequences, engagement ranges, and tactical positioning with the automatic precision of someone whose brain had been trained to process life and death variables under extreme pressure. Private Rodriguez watched Elena's preparations with growing amazement as he realized that the woman everyone had dismissed as kitchen help possessed combat capabilities that exceeded anything he had observed during his military service. The methodical efficiency with which she weaponized industrial equipment and transformed the maintenance facility into a lethal engagement zone demonstrated tactical knowledge that could only have come from extensive specialized training. Corporal Mitchell monitored the radio traffic while Elena completed her preparations, providing updates on the attacker's systematic search pattern as they moved through the central compound toward the maintenance facilities. 7 targets, moving in coordinated pairs with one individual, providing overwatch and tactical coordination. Elena absorbed the information and integrated it into her engagement plan with the calm professionalism of someone whose training had prepared her for command responsibilities under combat conditions. The tactical situation required precise timing and flawless execution. Elena had approximately 90 seconds from initial contact to eliminate all 7 targets before their external support realized that organized resistance had developed and implemented countermeasures that would overwhelm her improvised defensive position. Failure meant death for everyone in the maintenance facility, but success would neutralize the immediate threat and provide opportunities for coordinated response with any surviving security personnel. Elena positioned herself at the primary engagement point where her improvised weapon systems would achieve maximum effectiveness against targets entering the facility through the main access route. Her combat training had taught her that superior firepower could be neutralized by tactical positioning, precise timing, and the kind of individual initiative that bureaucratic military structures often tried to suppress in favor of predictable procedural responses. The sound of approaching footsteps and tactical communication reached Elena's position as the attacking force completed their search of adjacent buildings and prepared to clear the maintenance facility. She recognized the movement patterns and coordination signals from her own tactical training, understanding that these opponents possessed professional competence that would require exceptional performance to overcome. Elena's breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that had been drilled into her during marksmanship training. Each inhalation and exhalation timed to optimize physical performance during high-stress engagement. Her hands found their positions on improvised weapons with the automatic precision of someone whose training had created unconscious competence in weapon handling and tactical positioning. The first attacker appeared in the doorway exactly when Elena's tactical analysis had predicted, his night vision equipment providing clear visibility that would become a liability when her electrical countermeasures disabled his technological advantages. Elena triggered the power surge that eliminated their electronic advantages while simultaneously initiating her engagement sequence with the methodical precision of someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this kind of tactical situation. The industrial welding torch created a directed flame weapon that eliminated the first 2 targets before they could respond to the sudden loss of their night vision capabilities. Elena's movement to secondary positions occurred with fluid efficiency. as her tactical training took complete control of her actions. Each step calculated to maintain tactical advantages while avoiding exposure to return fire from remaining attackers. The propane explosion that eliminated targets 3 and 4 occurred exactly when Elena's timing calculations had predetermined. The blast carefully directed to neutralize threats while avoiding collateral damage to the personnel she was protecting. Her tactical training had included extensive instruction in controlled demolitions and the precise application of explosive force to achieve specific objectives without unnecessary destruction. Elena's transition to the improvised projectile weapons occurred with seamless efficiency as her muscle memory executed movements that had been practiced thousands of times during tactical training exercises. Industrial tools became precision. Weapons in her hands, each projectile directed with the accuracy that had made her exceptional during marksmanship evaluations and tactical assessments. Target 5 fell to a precisely thrown wrench that struck with enough force to eliminate the threat, while Elena simultaneously engaged Target 6 with electrical equipment that had been weaponized through knowledge of industrial systems and tactical applications. Her engineering understanding combined with combat training to create solutions that exceeded the tactical capabilities expected from food service personnel. The final attacker, the team leader who had been coordinating the assault through tactical communication and professional oversight, found himself facing someone whose competence exceeded every intelligence estimate about American personnel assignments and defensive capabilities. Elena's approach combined stealth, tactical positioning, and close-quarters combat techniques that had been honed through years of specialized training. The engagement concluded with Elena's implementation of restraint, techniques that neutralized the final threat without lethal force, demonstrating the kind of tactical discrimination that separated professional military personnel from individuals whose training focused solely on elimination of threats. Her decision to preserve one attacker for intelligence collection showed strategic thinking that went beyond immediate tactical objectives. 90 seconds from initial contact to complete neutralization of all 7 attackers. Elena stood among the results of her tactical performance, her breathing controlled and her movements efficient as she secured weapons and communication equipment that would provide valuable intelligence about the operation that had targeted Forward Operating Base Sandstone. Private Rodriguez emerged from his concealed position with an expression that conveyed complete amazement at what he had just witnessed. Corporal Mitchell stared at Elena with the kind of awe that people reserve for individuals who had just accomplished something that exceeded normal human capabilities under impossible circumstances. Elena began coordinating immediate post-engagement activities with the same methodical efficiency she had applied to the tactical situation. Secure all weapons and communication equipment. Establish contact with any surviving security personnel. Provide medical attention to the surviving attacker. And prepare defensive positions in case additional threats materialized from external support elements. The radio crackled with transmissions from surviving base personnel, who had monitored the engagement through communication intercepts and acoustic signatures. Staff Sergeant Kim's voice carried amazement and relief as she reported that hostile communication traffic had ceased completely and that scattered security elements were beginning to re-establish coordination with Central Command Authority. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks appeared on the frequency with the tone of someone who was trying to understand tactical developments that exceeded her analytical framework for the situation. All stations, we need immediate clarification on the status of hostile forces in the central compound. Last communication indicated complete neutralization of threats by unknown personnel using unconventional tactics. Elena keyed the radio with calm professionalism as she provided tactical updates that would help coordinate base-wide security restoration. This is Sergeant Rodriguez reporting successful neutralization of 7 hostile personnel in the maintenance facility. 1 prisoner secured for intelligence collection. Request medical and security support for post-engagement operations. The silence that followed Elena's transmission lasted long enough for everyone monitoring the frequency to process the implications of what they had just heard. The woman they had known as Cookie, the food service worker who had been dismissed and relegated to kitchen duties, had just accomplished something that professional security forces had been unable to achieve, despite superior numbers and equipment. Captain Webb's voice crackled over the radio with the strained tone of someone who had survived the command bunker assault and was trying to coordinate base operations despite severe injuries. Rodriguez, confirm your status and location. We need immediate tactical assessment of your engagement and current threat evaluation. Elena provided detailed debriefing information with the precision that demonstrated her tactical training and analytical capabilities. 7 professional military personnel eliminated using improvised weapons and tactical positioning. Intelligence materials recovered from the surviving prisoner indicate extensive reconnaissance and planning over several months. External support elements may still represent ongoing threats requiring continued vigilance. Master Sergeant Thompson's voice joined the frequency with a note of incredulity that he couldn't quite suppress. Rodriguez, I need confirmation that you're reporting elimination of 7 hostile personnel by yourself using improvised weapons in a 90-second engagement. The tactical significance of what Elena had accomplished was beginning to register with military personnel who understood the difficulty of achieving such results under any circumstances. Elena's response carried the quiet confidence of someone whose performance had validated years of training and tactical preparation. Confirmed, Sergeant. Hostile personnel eliminated using industrial equipment, controlled explosions, and close-quarters combat techniques. Tactical situation is currently stable with 1 prisoner secured for intelligence exploitation. The revelation that spread through base communication channels created a fundamental shift in how people understood Elena Rodriguez and her actual capabilities. 18 months of kitchen duty and bureaucratic dismissal had concealed tactical competence that exceeded the performance of entire security teams under optimal conditions. Lieutenant Morrison appeared at the maintenance facility with a quick reaction team that had been hastily assembled from surviving security personnel. His expression conveyed the mixture of amazement and professional respect that military personnel reserved for individuals who had just demonstrated exceptional competence under impossible circumstances. Elena provided tactical briefing information with the methodical thoroughness that demonstrated her analytical capabilities and understanding of intelligence requirements. The attacking force possessed detailed knowledge of base operations, suggesting either inside access or extensive surveillance over extended periods. Their equipment and tactics indicated professional military training rather than insurgent improvisation. The prisoner that Elena had secured provided intelligence that confirmed the sophistication of the operation targeting Forward Operating Base Sandstone. Professional military contractors working for unknown sponsors had conducted months of reconnaissance before implementing an operation designed to retrieve specific classified materials while eliminating witnesses and evidence. Colonel Briggs arrived at the maintenance facility with senior intelligence personnel who needed to understand how a food service worker had accomplished tactical objectives that had defeated organized security responses. Elena's debriefing revealed the extensive tactical training and combat experience that had been concealed by her bureaucratic reclassification 18 months earlier. The investigation that followed demonstrated that Elena's tactical assessment and individual initiative had prevented the loss of classified intelligence that could have compromised ongoing operations throughout the region. Her performance under pressure had exceeded the capabilities of entire units while operating with improvised equipment and no external support. Elena found herself restored to tactical duties with full combat authorization and recognition that her capabilities had been systematically underutilized due to bureaucratic procedures that prioritized compliance over competence. The incident report documented performance that would become case study material for tactical training programs and individual initiative under adverse conditions. The commendation ceremony that followed acknowledged Elena's exceptional performance. While recognizing that her tactical capabilities had always exceeded her official assignment, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks presented awards that reflected the military's understanding that some individuals possessed competence that couldn't be constrained by regulatory frameworks or administrative convenience. Elena Rodriguez stood at attention while senior officers acknowledged that the woman they had dismissed as just a cook had demonstrated tactical competence that exceeded the performance of specialized units under optimal conditions. The 18 months of kitchen duty had ended with recognition that her actual capabilities required assignments that matched her exceptional qualifications. The base personnel who had witnessed Elena's transformation from dismissed food service worker to tactical specialist understood that competence often existed in places where bureaucratic structures failed to recognize or utilize it effectively. Her performance had demonstrated that individual initiative and tactical training could overcome superior numbers and equipment when applied with precision and professional competence. Master Sergeant Thompson approached Elena after the ceremony with the expression of someone whose assessment had been fundamentally altered by observable performance. His acknowledgement that he had misjudged her capabilities reflected the broader recognition that institutional dismissal often concealed competence that exceeded organizational expectations and administrative frameworks. Elena's new assignment to tactical operations and specialized training responsibilities reflected the military's understanding that her capabilities required utilization rather than suppression. The kitchen duties that had defined 18 months of bureaucratic exile were replaced by responsibilities that matched her actual qualifications and tactical competence. The Forward Operating Base Sandstone incident became legendary within military training programs as an example of individual initiative overcoming impossible odds through tactical competence and professional preparation. Elena's 90-second engagement was analyzed extensively to understand how superior numbers and equipment could be defeated by exceptional performance and strategic thinking. Private Rodriguez received assignment to Elena's tactical training unit, recognizing that he had witnessed exceptional competence and could benefit from instruction by someone whose performance exceeded normal military standards. His respect for Elena's capabilities reflected the broader understanding that true competence often existed where institutional structures failed to recognize it. Elena Rodriguez had demonstrated that bureaucratic dismissal couldn't eliminate tactical competence or professional capabilities that had been developed through years of specialized training. Her performance under pressure proved that some individuals possessed exceptional abilities that required recognition rather than suppression through administrative convenience. The woman they had called just a cook had reminded everyone that competence exists regardless of official recognition, and that exceptional individuals often accomplished extraordinary results when circumstances finally allowed their actual capabilities to emerge. Elena's transformation from dismissed food service worker to recognized tactical specialist demonstrated that true ability transcended bureaucratic limitations and administrative frameworks. The legend of Elena Rodriguez spread throughout military training facilities as evidence that individual competence could overcome any obstacle when applied with precision and professional dedication. Her 90-second engagement became the standard for exceptional performance under adverse conditions, proof that some people were capable of accomplishing objectives that exceeded every reasonable expectation. Have you ever been written off by everyone around you, only to discover that when it truly mattered, you possessed exactly the capabilities that the situation required? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is someone whose true competence remains hidden until circumstances demand that you remember exactly what you're capable of accomplishing when all restrictions are finally removed. 3 years after the Forward Operating Base Sandstone incident, Elena Rodriguez stood in front of 200 aspiring military personnel at the Advanced Tactical Training Center in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The amphitheater was silent except for the subtle sounds of notebooks opening and pens clicking as students prepared to learn from someone whose combat performance had become required study material in tactical academies across 3 continents. Elena wore the insignia of a Chief Warrant Officer, a rank that recognized specialized expertise rather than traditional command authority. Her uniform displayed ribbons that told the story of someone whose career had taken unconventional paths, but had ultimately led to recognition that exceeded normal military advancement patterns. The silver star on her chest caught the overhead lighting as she moved to the podium with the confident bearing of someone who had learned that true competence transcended bureaucratic limitations. The lecture hall contained officers, non-commissioned officers, and specialized personnel who had traveled from installations throughout the United States and allied nations to attend Elena's course on individual initiative and adaptive tactical response. Her reputation had spread through military training networks as someone who could teach capabilities that weren't covered in standard doctrine, but proved essential when conventional procedures failed under pressure. Elena's teaching methodology combined theoretical instruction with practical exercises that challenged students to think beyond prescribed responses and develop individual capabilities that could function independently of command structure and external support. Her curriculum emphasized the kind of analytical thinking and tactical improvisation that had enabled her legendary performance at Forward Operating Base Sandstone. The students represented diverse backgrounds and specializations, but they shared common understanding that Elena Rodriguez possessed knowledge that couldn't be acquired through conventional training programs. Her course waiting list extended 18 months, and completion of her program had become a career enhancement that opened opportunities throughout the military special operations community. Elena began each session by describing her 18 months of kitchen duty and the systematic dismissal that had relegated her to food service, despite tactical qualifications that exceeded most personnel in combat specialties. She emphasized that competence often existed where institutional structures failed to recognize it, and that individual initiative required constant cultivation regardless of official assignment or recognition. Her first exercise required students to develop tactical solutions using only materials available in non-combat environments, forcing them to think creatively about weaponization and defensive positioning without access to standard military equipment. Elena had learned that tactical thinking was a mindset rather than a collection of procedures, and that true competence emerged when people were forced to solve problems without conventional resources. The Advanced Tactical Training Center had been established specifically to support Elena's unique curriculum and research into individual performance under adverse conditions. Her methodologies were being incorporated into training programs throughout NATO, ELAs, and had influenced doctrine development for special operations forces who operated in environments where conventional support wasn't available. Elena's personal life had undergone transformation that matched her professional recognition. She had married Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, a combat medic who had met her during a joint training exercise, where her reputation for exceptional competence had attracted attention from personnel who understood the value of tactical excellence. Their relationship was built on mutual respect for professional capabilities and shared understanding of military service demands. Their home near Fort Bragg reflected Elena's practical approach to life and her appreciation for simplicity that came from years of focusing on essential capabilities rather than superficial appearances. The house contained a workshop where Elena continued developing tactical innovations and training, equipment that enhanced individual performance through improved methodology rather than technological complexity. Elena's research into individual initiative and adaptive response had produced publications that were studied in military academies and had influenced training, doctrine development throughout allied nations. Her analytical approach to tactical problems combined practical experience with theoretical understanding that advanced the field of military science in measurable ways. The Fort Bragg assignment allowed Elena to maintain operational readiness while conducting research and training activities that utilized her exceptional capabilities in ways that benefited broader military communities. Her position represented recognition that some individuals possessed competence that required specialized utilization rather than conventional career progression. Elena's former colleagues from Forward Operating Base Sandstone had followed career paths that reflected their experience during the incident that had revealed her true capabilities. Private Rodriguez had become Sergeant Rodriguez and was serving as an instructor in Elena's training program, his respect for her competence having developed into professional partnership in curriculum development. Master Sergeant Thompson had requested transfer to Fort Bragg, specifically to work with Elena on tactical training innovations, his initial dismissive attitude having been replaced by recognition that he had witnessed exceptional performance that exceeded his previous understanding of individual capabilities. His acknowledgement of misjudgment had become part of his own professional development and leadership evolution. Captain Webb, who had survived his injuries from the command bunker assault, regularly visited Elena's training center to observe methodologies that had emerged from the tactical situation he had experienced firsthand. His reports on Elena's performance had contributed to her recognition and had influenced policy changes regarding personnel assessment and assignment procedures. Elena's impact extended beyond individual training to influence institutional approaches to talent recognition and capability utilization. Her case had become a study in how bureaucratic structures could overlook exceptional competence, and her eventual recognition had prompted reviews of personnel evaluation procedures throughout military services. The Forward Operating Base Sandstone incident remained classified at the highest levels, but Elena's tactical performance had been analyzed extensively by intelligence services and special operations communities who understood the significance of her achievement. Her methodologies were being incorporated into training programs for personnel who might face similar situations requiring individual initiative and adaptive response. Elena's speaking engagements at military conferences and academic institutions had established her as a recognized expert in individual performance optimization and tactical innovation. Her presentations emphasized that exceptional competence often existed in unexpected places and that institutional recognition systems needed continuous improvement to identify and utilize available capabilities effectively. Her research partnership with the Special Operations Command had produced training innovations that enhanced individual preparedness and tactical flexibility throughout elite military units. Elena's practical experience combined with analytical capabilities had advanced understanding of human performance under extreme pressure and had influenced equipment development and tactical doctrine. Elena's story had become motivational content for military personnel who faced challenges that exceeded their official training or authorization. Her example demonstrated that individual competence could overcome institutional limitations and that true capability emerged when people were willing to exceed conventional boundaries in service of important objectives. The awards and recognition that Elena had received represented acknowledgement that her performance at Forward Operating Base Sandstone had prevented intelligence compromise that could have affected ongoing operations throughout the region. Her tactical success had protected classified materials and had eliminated threats that possessed capabilities sufficient to penetrate American military installations. Elena's current assignment included responsibility for developing training programs that prepared personnel for situations where conventional procedures proved inadequate and individual initiative became essential for mission success. Her curriculum emphasized critical thinking, creative problem-solving, and tactical improvisation that could function independently of external support. Her influence on military training doctrine extended to allied nations whose personnel attended her courses and implemented her methodologies in their own training programs. Elena's reputation had transcended American military services to become international recognition of exceptional competence in tactical instruction and individual performance optimization. Elena's marriage to Michael Torres had produced a daughter, Sophia, who was growing up in an environment where competence was valued over appearance and where individual capability was cultivated through practical challenges rather than theoretical instruction. Elena's approach to parenting reflected her understanding that true strength emerged through facing difficulties rather than avoiding them. The family's weekend activities included outdoor challenges and problem-solving exercises that developed Sophia's analytical thinking and practical capabilities. Elena believed that competence was a mindset that could be cultivated from early age, and that children needed exposure to situations that required creative solutions and individual initiative. Elena's professional legacy continued evolving as her training programs produced graduates who applied her methodologies in operational environments throughout the world. Her influence was multiplied through personnel, who carried her approaches to units and installations where tactical innovation and individual initiative enhanced mission capabilities and survival outcomes. The transformation from dismissed cook to recognized tactical expert had required Elena to overcome institutional limitations and demonstrate competence that exceeded bureaucratic expectations. Her journey proved that exceptional individuals could transcend administrative constraints when circumstances required their actual capabilities to emerge. Elena Rodriguez had become living proof that competence existed regardless of recognition and that true ability would eventually be acknowledged when performance exceeded every reasonable expectation. Her story continued inspiring military personnel who understood that individual excellence could overcome any obstacle when applied with determination and professional dedication. Standing before her students at Fort Bragg, Elena represented the possibility that existed in every person who had been underestimated or dismissed by systems that failed to recognize their actual capabilities. Her example demonstrated that exceptional performance was always possible when people remembered what they were truly capable of accomplishing when circumstances removed all restrictions on their potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.